Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Recovery Month. Thank you for joining SAMHSA's Office of Recovery webinar series. Today's webinar topic, the interface of peer support and person-centered planning. Our webinar series is to educate and provide key discussions in many recovery spaces. Each week, we're highlighting a theme for the week. This week, our focus is on recovery dimensions of purpose, where we look at the importance of purpose as a motivator for positive change and how it can help the recovery process of people with mental health and substance use conditions. Purpose means different things to different people. We're defining purpose as conducting meaningful daily activities, such as going to work and/or school, participating in volunteer activities, family caretaking, or creative endeavors, and having the independence, income, and resources to participate in society. Everyone can find purpose in their lives through a career, creativity, or spirituality, and in daily activities that help people feel valued and feeling positive. Next week's theme will be community. You can register for more webinars on SAMHSA's Recovery Month webpage. Here at SAMHSA, we are celebrating Recovery Month, a national observance held every September to promote awareness of the power of recovery from mental health and substance use conditions. It celebrates the millions of Americans in recovery and recognizes the contributions and accomplishments of people in recovery, their loved ones, and allies. Recovery events are celebrated around the nation and the world. During Recovery Month, we also applaud the dedication of service providers, states, and communities who champion recovery. Recovery Month is intended to counter stigma and instill hope in the American public that recovery is possible. My name is Katera Aslami Tamplin. I'm a trauma survivor, a person with lived experience and in recovery from mental health condition and substance use challenges, in addition to being a family member. I have the honor of serving as a public health advisor in the Office of Recovery and providing the opening welcome for today's webinar. I also have my amazing colleagues, Julie Erickson and Carol Cecil from the Office of Recovery assisting. The Office of Recovery is charged with advancing recovery across the nation in partnership with people with lived experience, their families, and communities impacted by mental health and/or substance use conditions. Our office has two major events happening this month. Our Walk for Recovery, which was celebrated on September 5th, and our Star Awards and Gallery of Hope display on September 24th, which will be live streamed. And we also will be releasing fact sheets throughout the month as well. We thank you for your attendance and support during Recovery Month and throughout the year. Once the session is complete, we hope to have some time for questions and answers, and one of our staff will be monitoring. So please direct any questions you have in the Q&A box. So today we have a great lineup of leaders to speak about peer support and person-centered planning. They are Janice Tandora, Associate Professor with the Yale Program for Recovery and Community Health; Jesse Davis, Peer Specialist with the Texas Institute for Excellence in Mental Health, Workforce Development, and Consulting; and Amy Pierce, Training and Technical Assistance Consultant with Achara Consulting. I will defer to Janice, Jesse, and Amy to provide some detail of their background when they begin their section of their presentation. And just a disclaimer, the views, thoughts, and opinions reflected in this presentation and those of this session, including any handouts or related material, belong solely to the presenters and do not necessarily reflect the official views, policies, or position of the U.S. federal government, the Department of Health and Human Services, or SAMHSA. Presenters in this session have no financial or other potential conflicts of interest to disclose. Again, thank you for attending, and during the Q&A section at the end of the presentation, we will have a short evaluation survey link in the chat and ask that you please complete that. It helps us here in the Office of Recovery and SAMHSA to get feedback from you to ensure our activities are of value to the field. And now I'll turn it over to Janice Tandora.
Great. Thank you so much, Katira. I hope I did okay with my slide control, advancing your slides. I was trying to follow your lead there. So welcome, everyone. It's so nice to be here in this space with you today and to really team up with Amy and Jesse on a topic that's near and dear to our hearts. I am Janice Tandora, and I'll just share a little bit about my background that I kind of bring to today's conversation. So I'm a clinical psychologist by training. As Katira said, I'm at the Yale Program for Recovery and Community Health, where I've been for over 20 years now, kind of doing work in this space and in a whole bunch of states around the country and with some national organizations. But I also am really passionate about this topic from a personal perspective. I am a loving mom of an autistic young adult who has struggled very mightily with the mental health consequences. I often say of being neurodivergent in a neurotypical world. And I myself live with some really serious medical issues. So over the last decade of our lives, we spent a lot of time with doctors, and I have really seen the healing power of authentic person-centered practice and planning. But I've also known that kind of raw vulnerability and upset when I've felt like our voice and choice has been silenced, right, by the opinions of well-intended others. So this is a topic that resonates with me on a number of levels. So thrilled to have a great turnout here today. A technical note that we are going to cover a lot of territory in this hour, so we're going to move pretty quickly, but there is going to be a brief Q&A at the end. And then also you'll see that Amy, Jesse, and I have worked hard to put a lot of hyperlinks into our slides so that those of you who want to kind of slow down, take a little deeper dive, will have that as a resource ultimately when slides are distributed. So that's a little bit about me. Amy and Jesse, when they sort of step into the spotlight in a bit, will share their background, but we want to know a little bit about you. And it helps us to have a sense of who's the audience. So if I can ask for some tech support from someone on the SAMHSA side to go ahead and launch our audience poll here. And then as you do that, now we recognize, of course, that you may be bringing multiple hats, into today's conversation. So this one is actually set up to give you some multiple choice. So I think we're gonna go ahead and launch this poll.
It has been launched. We've got 70 out of 90 that have already responded.
Oh, terrific. I
don't know if you can see it or not.
That's all right. I'm glad. Yeah. All right, good. So we'll give you just another couple of seconds to respond to that. And then can you go ahead and share the results when we're sounds like we're pretty close to a high percentage there.
To be able to share it, I have to end the poll. So I don't know if you wanted to give folks a few more seconds or not. You tell me when to end it, and then I'll be able to share it.
Where are we at?
Same, 70 out of 91.
Okay, why don't we go ahead just in the interest of time and share the results? All right. Oh, excellent. Okay, so as we anticipated, we've got a really nice diversity of people who are joining us here today. Amy, Jesse, and I have worked hard. We hope there's going to be a little bit of everything in here, a little something for everyone in the topics that we cover, and we'll do our best to tailor our remarks to your different hats and stakeholder roles that you're sharing today with us. So if we can go ahead and close the poll. I actually think I'm going to skip this slide because Katara, you did such a beautiful job of describing this, right? Because person-centered planning is all about helping people find their person, their purpose in life, and co-creating plans with them that help them really work toward that unique vision of a good life in the community. So I don't think much more needs to be said about that because you did that beautifully. I do, if you have not seen this yet, I quickly wanted to make you aware, this is a kind of a hot off the presses resource that I really wanted to encourage you to check out. It's a PCP issue brief that was just released by SAMHSA back in April. It offers some comprehensive guidance for state leadership around how to better align organizational structures to support the concrete implementation of good person-centered planning in the field. And I actually had the opportunity to lead the development of this resource behind the scenes with a co-author from the National Center on Advancing Person-Centered Practices and Systems. So I can say from my direct involvement in that we worked really hard to pack it full of some of the very best PCP implementation tools that we've gathered in our travels. And the really critical bottom line message of this resource is that person-centered planning can't just be realized with workforce development and training all of your direct service providers, because the most passionate and skilled practitioners are going to be swimming upstream if they're working in a system where key organizational variables they're not aligned with, or worse, they potentially undermine the foundational principles and practices that PCP is based on. So this issue brief really presents a range of information, everything from how do you design state level policy, how do you align quality monitoring procedures, even how do you design electronic health records to better support person-centered planning. But really the most important message and practice in that document, that's the most critical dimension of systems level PCP implementation, is the need to actively engage and follow the lead of your lived experience leaders in all aspects of systems transformation. So that type of authentic engagement and respect has to happen not just at the micro level in the amplification of the individual voice of a service user in person-centered planning. It has to happen at the macro level, where we have to amplify the voice of your recovery communities and the lived experience leaders who are within them. So if you get one thing right, following this mantra is the critical piece. And just as SAMHSA supports PCP and increasingly has concrete expectations around it, SAMHSA and the Office of Recovery Affairs in particular has played a leadership role in the continued growth and expansion of a variety of peer support roles across, a wide range of service contexts. And I'm not going to say much more about that topic because I'm going to leave it to the experts, to Amy and Jesse. But I did at least want to say briefly that we have to be mindful of sort of the promising practices and slippery slopes that emerge when these two recovery-oriented practices are brought together, because when it's done well, meaning with conscious, intentional efforts to maintain role clarity so that peers can be sort of in the system, but not of the system, right? As we kind of talked about, magic can really happen. And we've seen some of the best person-centered planning when implementation is done well and with integrity. But, and this is a big but, if it's done haphazardly without conscious, intentional efforts around that role clarity, peer specialist integration into person-centered planning can undermine both of these recovery-oriented practices, because peers kind of find themselves pressured to contribute to the process in a way that's not consistent with their intended peer role, and it's not consistent with their code of ethics, as Jesse's going to talk about in a bit here. So my job is really just give you a very quick sort of speed dating overview of what person-centered recovery planning is from sort of a big picture perspective. So this is a common graphic we use that really talks about how the 4 Ps of philosophy, process, plan, and purpose have to come together in synergy to truly implement person-centered planning in a way that it has high integrity and stays true to its foundational values. But unfortunately, despite the growing consensus around this big picture of PCRP, we have seen states and organizations sometimes profess what's more of a philosophical commitment to the practice without authentic changes in day-to-day practice. And honestly, that can feel a bit like a bait and a switch, and we need greater accountability around what it actually means to practice person-centered planning. So if we acknowledge that there can be this disconnect between the vision of person-centered planning and what it actually looks like on the ground, what can we do about that? And what types of skills and abilities do professionals need to have to really support high-quality PCP? So in order to explore that question, I just wanted to introduce you to the work of NCAPS. I mentioned them before, the National Center on Advancing Person-Centered Practices and Systems. It's a cross-disability initiative, actually, and I've had the pleasure of working with NCAPS for quite a few years, specifically as it relates to the application of their mission in the behavioral health space. And this slide just provides a graphic overview and a link to a really nice resource that we developed around 5 core competency domains for staff who facilitate person-centered planning. So what I'm going to do here is just a very big picture overview where I'm going to spotlight each of these domains before I turn it over to Jesse. So starting at the top, domain A focuses on really strategies to ensure that planning appreciates the full humanity of the people and the families that we serve, rather than focusing just on narrow management of clinical symptoms. And to do this well, staff have to be able to use a wide variety of strengths-based interviewing tools. They have to be able to incorporate those into the written recovery plan. And it's also about using tools and strategies that respect a person's cultural worldview and their preferences and their needs, including around individual or collective trauma, which might arise from, being a member of a historically marginalized group or identity status. The second domain, domain B, focuses on cultivating connections that foster recovery, both inside and outside the system of care. And so this involves enhancing coordination across professional supports and natural supports, respecting rights around community inclusion, using tools such as circles of support, community-based asset mapping. And honoring this domain means no more clinical gatekeeping, which is what I have come to kind of refer to that. And by that, what I mean is I often hear things like, we know you want to go back to work, or we know you want to move out of the group home, but until you've done 90 meetings in 90 days, or until you've had 3 months worth of negative tox screens, or you've been med compliant for 6 months, we don't feel comfortable supporting that goal in the recovery plan or referring you to the supported employment or the supported apartment program. And I just want to make a really strong statement here in this domain that kind of clinical gatekeeping makes people earn the right to pursue their life and their goals in the community by jumping through really what's kind of arbitrary clinical hoops that professionals set for them. And it has no place in good quality, high integrity person-centered planning. It also means we are really careful about what I call the trap of the one-stop shop. So if someone's faith and spirituality is a cornerstone of their recovery, yes, we want them to have access to, for example, a spirituality group at, the local mental health center, or maybe at a psychosocial clubhouse. But at the same time, that shouldn't be someone's only option. We have to learn how to partner with people and really get a sense, how do you want to experience your faith and spirituality? And if that means that you want to get back to your Baptist services on Sunday on Main Street, how do we co-create a plan that creates a pathway to community life for you in that way? So just a couple of cautionary notes there. Third domain, arguably, all of them are important, but arguably this one is perhaps the most critical. It's the domain about rights, choice, and control. It's all about respecting a person's right to maximum self-determination, whether that's in honoring their recovery goals for their plan or supporting them in completing something like a psychiatric advance directive. And this is where I think I'm going to prompt Julie to possibly put a link into the chat, because if you're not aware, the Office of Recovery Affairs is currently in the middle of sponsoring a 2-part series. I believe the second part is tomorrow. Really excellent practical webinars on psychiatric advance directives. So I just encourage you all to check those out. The fourth domain is about partnership, teamwork, facilitation, and coordination. That's a mouthful, but essentially that boils down to the quality of the planning process, or the meeting itself, or meetings, plural, that precedes the development of the written plan. So it speaks to the logistics of how a meeting gets organized, as well as who's involved, the roles that people take on during that conversation. And while it needs to make space for all voices at the table, the emphasis is really on the need to consistently elevate the person's voice and their preferences and priorities, and to kind of keep the conversation coming back to that. And then finally, I will say domain E focuses on how do we translate all that person-centered philosophy and process into the actual recovery planning document, whether that's on paper or in an EHR. And how do we really do that in a way that it stays true to the person's vision? And here, I have to say that, very often when I am working with systems, they tend to prematurely jump to, Janice, we're so frustrated about the documentation. Can you just come and teach all of the staff how to write a good person-centered plan? And, you know, I have some tools and tricks that I can do that, but it's always only going to be as good as the foundational values that are underneath that written documentation. So I just really offer a word of caution that, a plan on paper doesn't necessarily speak to the quality of what is actually happening in the room. So it's really critically important to remember that. But at the end of the day, what that last domain really gets at is the fact that if we're truly embracing person-centered planning, and we're having conversations with people about getting their kids back and going back to church and making some friends and graduating from high school, if that's the conversation that's happening in the room, we shouldn't be having plans that come out of it that are only about medication compliance, clinical stability, and behavioral control. And very often the quality breaks down when we try to move from process to documentation. There's a tremendous amount of confusion in the field around this. Like, how do you write a plan that first and foremost fundamentally honors the person, while also being cognizant of the fact that you have pressures to satisfy the chart? So we've worked hard to get a lot of tools and tips out there, and a lot of those will be accessible in the links to you throughout the presentation. So all of this to say, we've made some really good progress about PCP implementation, but we have a very long way to go. And I really am of the mindset that the quality integration of peer specialists into this process can help us accelerate that and move the needle on this topic. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jessie.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Jessie Davis. My pronouns are they and she. Both sets work perfectly fine for me. And I'm a peer supporter through and through. And with that, I know that there are so many different ways that we can describe peer support or have job titles or different certifications even. So if you would share, if you know, or if you're a peer supporter, share what your peer support role is called in your community in the chat. And while you're doing that, I'll share a little bit more about myself. I've been working in the peer support field for about 10 years now, and my niche is with youth and young adults. I have multiple different trainings from multiple different states and areas, and I have absolutely fallen in love with this field. Currently, though, I'm working in training and technical assistance, so that means I get to work with organizations or entities to help make the experience better for people who work in the workforce as peer supporters and also people who are receiving support. That was a lot, and I'm looking at the chat. There's a lot of different things: recovery coach, recovery support, CPSW, certified peer support worker in New Mexico. I've worked with y'all a bit. Yeah, that's awesome. All right, we can go to the next slide. And so I also want to note that with all of these different names and titles, there's also a lot of different, quote, definitions of what peer support is across the country. And it's really hard to find one specific definition that everybody agrees on. Some people will say, like, this is really great, but I don't like this word. And others will say, I really don't like that one at all. But at its core, it's not based on psychiatric models or diagnosis or, any of those clinical pieces. It's about understanding each other's situation empathetically through shared experience of emotional and psychological pain. So, in other words, that was a quote, and there's more on the slide, but it's people connecting to people. And we do have this as a profession, which I'll get into the values of peer support work as a profession in a moment. But peer support workers help people to develop their own goals rather than just kind of go with whatever's being told to them. They help create strategies for self-empowerment, taking concrete steps towards building fulfilling, self-determined lives for themselves. Peer support workers can help break down barriers of experience and understanding with staff that may not have that lived experience. And they can also work with power dynamics that may get in the way of working with other members of the treatment team. Peer support is supposed to be as mutual as possible, which is hard when it's a paid position, but it's still something that we really focus on, and it's core central to our work as peer support workers or peer support specialists or recovery coaches or whatever it is called in your community. We also have our role as being to assist people with finding and following their own recovery paths without judgment, expectation, rules, requirements. So peer supporters look at all paths to recovery, of recovery, and paths of wellness, especially if people don't want to use the word recovery. That is totally okay. There is a link that I think we'll put in the chat of the brass tacks peer support document, but I'm not 100%. But we can go to the next slide. And this is where I wanted to talk about the values of the peer support profession. These are the national practice guidelines, or this is a link to the national practice guidelines for peer supports across the country. This was created by the organization NAPS, the National Association of Peer Supporters. And I do want to make a note, please always refer to it as NAPS rather than NAPS, because NAPS is a derogatory term for hair, and they definitely have requested that they are called NAPS. So putting that out there. But this is a free download, and this is a document that was created based off of another document that had, I believe, 98% consensus that this is our profession. This is the values that we guide our work on. This is what we as peer supporters say is the heart of our profession. And when you're looking at these, yeah, other professions may have something similar and should have something similar, right? But this document here will help with peer specialists and supervisors in guiding through different interactions that may come up where, hey, how is this aligning with my practice guidelines? It may show you some different suggestions on questions to ask yourselves and things to check in on. We can go to the next slide. And we also have ethical guidelines. So peer supporters across pretty much everywhere that has a certification or a credential for peer support have ethical guidelines. But all of them are a little bit different. Most of them are very similar, but there are going to be some differences. Some places have ethical guidelines about dual relationships or holding dual roles with the people that we're working with, and some places don't. This is all based on the needs of the community, and the community creates it, but please know that these are professionals in the workforce while also being people with lived experience, while also working with people in your programs, while also having all of this life to share. The National Practice Guidelines for Peers and Supervisors that was on the last slide is like I mentioned, built off of another document, which is the one here on this slide. This is one that can help you with just kind of understanding the peer support world as a workforce, as a profession, and just kind of as folks who have a formalized role. Peer supporters don't always work in paid positions, although I personally am an advocate for making sure that we all get paid fairly for the work that we do. But peer supporters aren't always in paid positions. Sometimes we volunteer, sometimes we are doing paid work. There is a Peer Recovery Center of Excellence directory of state certification. So if you're unsure of what the requirements are in your area, your locality, your community, your state, please take a look at that. It will give you information about what you need to become a peer supporter, and will also help you find information about what the ethics might be for your community. I also want to make sure to mention that peer specialists are not clinicians. You can see role drift every now and then, especially when somebody is working as the only peer supporter in a team, or, maybe there's only one or two, and they don't really connect with the peer workforce much, because when we're completely surrounded by clinicians, we tend to mold towards the people that we are near all the time. Have you ever heard you're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with? I don't know how true that is, but I do know that the more time I spend with someone, the more I end up acting like them, or talking like them, or sharing some of the same conversations and everything else. And so when we're thinking about role drift, it's not necessarily something to be shamed about or anything like that, but it is something we have to work on and make sure that we are staying true to our peer support principles, where we're non-clinicians. We don't diagnose, we don't treat, we don't do assessments. We are strictly there to provide support to the person in the way that they're asking for support. We are complementary to other services and supports that folks may be receiving. And peer supporters can work in roles that are not titled peer support, right? So if I'm a peer supporter and I want to work as a front desk staff, great, but don't call that a peer support role. That is a front desk staff, right? If I'm a peer supporter and I want to work in case management, great. That's a case management role, not a peer support role. And so we have to make sure on both ends that we are very careful about the role and protecting where we're at in that space. We can go to the next slide. And so with this, we do have a potentially complementary nature of peer work with recovery planning and person-centered recovery planning. I know there was a request earlier to make sure that we are using all of the acronyms out fully spelled, and so I hope that I covered all of those. But SAMHSA has core competencies for peer workers and behavioral health services, and sorry, I just saw the chat and it, but SAMHSA has a document that you can look at, and there are different resources that you can utilize. But at this, I do want to make sure that I am transitioning to, I believe Amy is supposed to be coming up next.
Yep, you're good, Jesse. You're good. Let me go ahead and advance the slide here, because Amy's going to come onto the stage now. Just because we really have to have a frank conversation about, when you think about peer specialist integration and person-centered planning, what should and also what shouldn't it look like, right? We want these things to be like peanut butter and jelly, not oil and water. So Amy's going to lead us through a little bit of the sort of promising practices and slippery slopes.
Thanks, Janice. And as I'm just going to kind of leave y'all with this, and Janice, if you'll go to the slide, there we are. I just want to ask y'all, how can peer providers support and strengthen the practice of person-centered recovery planning? And what has worked really well in your experience? And so as I tell you a little bit about myself, if y'all can just use chat and spend some time putting your comments to those questions in there, that will be incredible. So, you know, in order for me to really speak about the role of what professional peer providers can play in like person-centered recovery planning, I want to tell you a little bit about my professional background, but also my personal background. So I've been working in peer support in some form or fashion since 2000. And that's where I kind of stumbled into this, being able to utilize the value of my lived experience, where I started the first peer support program in the state hospital system in Texas. And during that time, I was able to be in many different roles. I took on being a peer support supervisor, and also have worked in the local community services. And then for the last 8 years or so, I really spending time working nationally and internationally and providing training and technical assistance around peer support implementation, as well as recovery-oriented practices. I am a certified peer specialist. I am a peer specialist supervisor and advanced level RAP facilitator. And my current role right now is that I work with a CHAR Consulting as a training and technical assistance consultant. Now that's kind of out of the way. You know, the thing for me and what's at the heart of all this is that I am someone who hears and sees things that others don't at times. And it's been because of that journey that I stumbled into this work. And, for many years, I dreamed of a time where individuals could um, really be fully heard. And the focus of professional services wouldn't just be medication or stability or compliance or acceptance of your illness, but really focusing on the things that breathe life into people, right? Maybe that's getting a job for some people. Maybe it's volunteering for other persons, um, or having successful relationships or playing with your nieces and nephews. But whatever it is, like, what is that? And if we focus on that, it's like all the other things kind of come in, like dominoes kind of come into play. And, when I think back to really my early part of my journey after I had been hospitalized for that very last time, which is almost a year, and that was the same hospital I ended up starting this program at. I went to the ACT team. I had been on the ACT team for probably 2.5 years at that point in time. And I was really excited. Like, I wanted to apply for this part-time position. I was on disability, but I knew I could do this work. And when I went to my team and talked to them about it, there was a very strong looks on their face, and they were really concerned that I was getting unwell again. But at the core and in the heart of myself, I knew I could do this. And so I didn't tell them, and I applied for that job, and I got that job, and I ended up leaving that service to go work that job. And I say that because I can only imagine what it would have been like for myself, having been in a place in this space where people really supported that decision and supported that transition, because it wasn't always easy. And I do believe that, there was no malice in it, but that for me is what person-centered recovery is all about, and processes are all about. Janice, go ahead and go to the next one. And so, what person-centered recovery planning does is it taps into that person's strengths. And if we think about the role of peer providers, what they can play in this process is that, as peer providers, what do? We support individuals. We hold space for them. We are that model as well as what's possible. And we spend that time with individuals in exploration to find what do they want to do? What do they want to see as possible? And in person-centered recovery planning, having peer specialists involved, it provides the space where not only do the individuals possibly see what might be possible where they didn't see what was possible before, but also you have an opportunity to really use snippets of story, your lived experience, to really broaden the minds possibly of the teams you're working with. Because oftentimes persons with very severe symptoms or seen with certain diagnosis, when they think big or want to, be an astronaut, what happens is they're shut down. But what if we actually took that idea, took that belief that they have in what they wanted to do to get towards during the time of services, and explored what did that look like? And then wrapped our services around supporting that individual to make that happen. You can go to the next one, Janice. And so as a peer specialist, one of the beautiful things that I think is that we always come from the place of what's strong, right? Looking at and pulling from person's experiences, those strengths, whereas some circumstances, just like in my own life, where they were viewed as I was a frequent flyer, right? Or I was labeled this or that. But what was actually occurring was that I was really figuring out and finding what I needed to fully be able to live life. And oftentimes when one is in kind of this circle and this trap, it's hard to find hope. It's hard to find that place of what's possible. And as peer providers, we can really create that safe space for individuals to share and explore without that feeling of judgment or shame, where they can really just kind of like brainstorm all of the things they may have thought about at one point in time in their life or never even dared to dream. Because those are the things that get me out of the bed each day. Those are the things that get persons out of the bed each day, right? And as a peer specialist, there may be a place where I use an experience where I might share that I often used to eat pennies to obstruct the radio waves that I believed allowed people to listen to my thoughts, right? And through sharing that snippet, it opens a space where others who may have felt that they have certain challenges in their life, that dreaming is too scary, or dreaming or taking risk, they're afraid of. But sharing that story and seeing me, someone who may have had that experience walking alongside them, can also create what's possible. Go to the next one, Janice. I'm kind of going through these a little bit fast to kind of.
You want me to stay here? I advanced one for you.
Yeah, let me see where you're at, Janice. Hang on. I lost you. Give me just 1 second.
No problem.
Yeah, go ahead and there. That's perfect. And as a peer specialist and a peer specialist supervisor, I was always trying to figure out, like, what does the peer specialist role look like in this person-centered recovery process? How do we bring peer specialists in to support individuals, but also stay within their role? When I actually left working at the state hospital, I had been there 12 years. It was because Texas took on this pilot project of trying to figure out, like, what does person-centered recovery planning look like? And so I got to kind of like play with it from the very beginning. And one of the things that I found was very, very helpful was being able to support individuals with some type of like pre-meeting exploratory tool. For me, I'm very attached to what you see on this slide, which is the getting in the driver's seat, and primarily attached to it because I've used it over and over and over. And it was created long ago. Janice will always tell you that it needs to be updated. And having a tool such as that supported me in my role as a peer specialist to support individuals in that exploratory process, where it was a kind of a very structured way of doing it in our unstructured conversations. And through that, we were able to talk about, their rights related to services, right? We were able to talk about and explore what was that meeting going to look like. We were able to kind of take some time to address those concerns and those fears they may have about going in that room, and being able to role play those circumstances as well. There are many ways that a peer specialist can support an individual in that pre-planning process. It doesn't have to be this tool. But I really encourage you, if you are really looking at the expansion of person-centered recovery planning at your organization, having peer specialists involved in this process. I don't know that I have a word to describe what can happen for an individual and what can open up, so that when they step into that room with their team, like, they're coming in prepared, they're coming in with language they want to share, they're coming in with possibly the limitations that they had placed on themselves, like, opened up. We talk about who can be in that meeting. We talk about what supports they may want. You can go to the next one, Janice. And so when we think about this pre-planning meeting going into the actual meeting, this is a place where a peer specialist can easily join that individual in that meeting, as long as the person requests it, right? Not an assumption that they want me to be there, but as long as they request it, I'll be with them there in a heartbeat, to be that support, whatever it may look like for them. It may be that, I'm providing a gentle reminder of some of the previous conversations that we had, or simply just sitting next to them while they share their truth, right? I do also believe that it's really important for peer specialists to be aware of the whole person-centered recovery. Sometimes those acronyms can be a mouthful. Be aware of the person-centered recovery planning process so that they're able to explain it, able to share, able to be able to articulate it to individuals. And it's very important that the peer specialist is not the person who creates that plan. And that goes into a lot of what Jesse was sharing earlier around those power differentials and around really upholding peer specialist code of ethics and staying in our role. Because our role as peer specialist, and our role from even the ethics standpoint, is supporting that individual in whatever it is that they're wanting out of their time at the organization. You know, even if the team themselves may not see that it's something possible, but as a peer specialist, I'm going to support that person in those decisions, right? One of the other things that we can also do at times, sometimes in those planning meetings, what I found is there can be like certain things may not translate, or a peer specialist may, quality, a QMHP or qualified mental health professional or case manager may be sharing something or looking for certain information that the individual's also giving them, but because language that's used is not exactly the same, there's like that disconnect. So being able to kind of stand in that place of possibly, like, I hate to use the word translating, but assisting with those communication barriers that can show up. Janice, can you go to the next one? My head's getting ahead of my mouth here. It's important though to remember, when you're looking at this person-centered recovery process, there's a lot of slippery slopes that can come into play, right? So thinking about the role of peer support in PCRP, what are some of the person-centered recovery planning? What are some of the challenges or ways that peer support can be undermined? And what are some of your thoughts on just some of the must not do's, like peer specialists should never do this? And I'm gonna let y'all continue to chat in there as I continue on here, just for the sake of time. Jesse shared a little bit ago from this document that we have on the screen. And this is from the National Practice Guidelines for Peer Specialists and Supervisors. I love this document more than anything. And this just goes into that place of peer support must always be voluntary, right? And just the same as when a person's creating their plan, they get to choose if it's on their plan or not. And if they choose not to, that there should be no penalty. That if the peer services are on that plan, if a person chooses then not to receive those services, that there also not be a penalty. And it's one of the places where, when I worked in the community a number of years ago, that we had to really work around, because they were wanting us to put peer groups on what they call the scheduler. And at that time, if a person missed appointments, they could miss like 2 or 3 of them, and then they would terminate services. And so because peer services must always be voluntary, we really had to advocate for that not to be the case with any type of peer program or peer service. It always must be and should be in those peer services that we must focus on what the individual is wanting to work on, not what we want to bring to the table, not what people think we should bring to the table. You can go to the next one, Janice.
Amy, I'm wondering, just in the interest of time, if I might go to the sort of the must not do's.
You sure, man?
You want to, that makes some sense? Will that work for you?
That's where I was gonna jump through.
Okay, all right.
And you will have these slides, just so you know.
Yeah.
When you get these must not do's, some of the ones that we've come up with. It's important that, depending upon what role you're in, if you're in a role that's a supportive of peer specialist, that we never put peer specialist in that mole role to gather information and bring back information to the team. And as peer specialists, that we never slide into that role of a mole. that we're not involved in any type of convincing of a person to comply with a service or take medications or do anything that they're stating that they don't want to, nor it's really important that we don't put our own biases or our own beliefs upon them. And exactly, like, even if we don't agree with something, like, that's not our role, right? It's important that, we're not involved in tasks or functions that undermine the principle of mutuality, because mutuality is at the heartbeat, and that we always hold that place of hope and belief of what a person can do, not what, and not come from a place of what they can't do, right? And part of that also looks like in how we document in clinical documentation. In certain organizations, in certain states, you can build Medicaid, and part of that also connects to the person-centered recovery plan within documentation. And when we're doing documentation, we need to do documentation that's peer-centric and comes from strengths-based processes, uses human experience language, and honors the individual in their strengths and the peer specialist role. And with that, I'm going to throw it back to Janice, I think.
I just encourage you to take a peek at the chat, because you all have added some of your own wisdom, right? Like really pointing out things like that are inherently not based in voluntary engagement in services, mandatory drug screens, room checks. We have to be really mindful. I think, frankly, all staff and professionals, but in particular, those things go against the grain of this concept of mutuality. So I'm just going to leave you with this takeaway. And just say that, again, kind of trust that peer support, when it's done and done well and with integrity, it really will always support good quality person-centered recovery planning. It's going to help people connect with their purpose. But that really does take a lot of intentional mindfulness, thoughtfulness about what it looks like, and a lot of conversations so that we're conscious that in the process of bringing these things together, peers can sort of be in the system and bring all their unique value added, but not be of the system, right? Like Jesse was saying, not sort of take on the mold of the 5 folks that are around them. So it's all of our responsibility to honor this. We've given you lots of resources and tools throughout the way. They're all gathered here. You'll have them when the links come out to you. And we are going to pause there, and we had a few minutes left for questions. And I think I might have seen
Justice had her hand raised a few minutes ago, and I asked her to wait till y'all were ready for questions. And we also have one question in the question and answer.
Justice, you want to go ahead and unmute, and we'll see if one of us can help out? Or while we're waiting for Justice, maybe for you to unmute, you want to read us the other one that came in?
Justice said she accidentally hit her raise hand button.
Okay.
The one that's in the question and answer is, why is language so important?
Ooh, that's a whole webinar unto itself. I will quickly just say, language is a reflection of thinking, and thinking impacts behavior. And if we are writing narratives about people's lives, that every single one of them starts and says, patient is a 53-year-old chronic schizophrenic with a long history of non-compliance that leads to repeated hospitalization, it's almost impossible to back your way out of that kind of language into the kind of quality, high integrity person-centered plan we're talking about here. Amy or Jesse may have other thoughts, as well on that front.
Yeah, I think language, there's so many different layers of language. And, as peer specialist, one of the ways that I learned is we call it human experience language. So we're using person-centered plus common everyday words. And in doing that, it really opens up like what actually is going on for a person. It really opens up the experiences a person may have, not only for the individuals that we may be walking alongside, but for others at the organization, right? Language creates the space that we can walk into and what's possible. Language is the place where, for myself, that intentionality of language as well. I've seen it like change the way in which persons have thought about a topic or an individual, just in a way that I've used certain words. And yeah, there's so many different things about it, because language also comes to that place where if we really look at what's going on for a person versus like the language that we throw out, like manipulative or like borderline or like all these other things, but like what's actually occurring in language, we can open up like those strengths for an individual as well.
Thanks, Amy. I'm going to go to Lindsay, because Lindsay, I think you've had your hand up for a bit. Lindsay Cochin, I apologize if I'm not getting the name right.
Okay, it's Kosen. So how I hear a lot about and it's kind of an issue about people feel like peers have what's called the duty to warn, and they often obviously get that confused. But like if somebody is saying that they're going to harm themselves, that peers get this thing, and we have to immediately call the police and have police or have intervention on that. How do you feel that plays into our role?
I can share a little bit.
Amy and
That is
Jesse.
going to be highly dependent on your state guidelines and whether your state has a requirement for peer supporters for a duty to warn or not. I personally know that you're in Texas, and in Texas there is a line that is not well described of what that requirement is, but I would highly suggest making sure that you're working with your organization's folks, supervisors, people at the state who are peer supporters or peer support training and technical assistance folks to help you figure out what your requirements are in your locality. That's not something that we can say across the country what the requirements are. Of course, as peer supporters, voluntary voice and choice, mutuality is always going to be at the forefront. So we're going to make sure that we're following what the person is asking for as much as possible. But we also have to make sure that we're following with our local guidelines.
Thanks, Jesse. Michael, you want to pop in? It looks like you have something to say. Yeah.
I do. Yes, please. If you can just have everyone look in the chat for the link for the evaluations, we would really appreciate everyone really taking the moment to fill out that 2-minute survey. And then you go forward to your next question. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Bridget, you've had your hand up for a bit there.
Unmute. There we go. I just want to comment a little bit on that last one, just from my own perspective. I would call on my friends if I thought they were unsafe, because I've had suicide in my life, in my family. And so I just want to say that. And I do have a duty to warn here. My role is so complicated. Our role here is complicated in that I use peer support, and my other peer support workers here, we use it in our care management. So we're not case managers here, we're community support workers. And so we use that knowledge and understanding to help our clients, but not just peer work. Like we're not simply just CPSWs. Everybody here is also a case manager, and they facilitate in my PSR team. So I'm the only certified peer support worker, so I'm the only one who can bill in New Mexico. The rest of them cannot, but I can bill as a peer support worker. So I'm just like, when that role gets that complicated, or when we're using our programs that way, is that like not the way that they feel it should be done? Like for me, my job is actually what made me sick, being in working in a mental health type situation. And so that's where I got post-traumatic stress and was out of work for 5 years. So I came back into my field, but now I'm a peer support worker also. I'm confused.
One thing I would just quickly add, I can't speak to this from a peer specialist perspective. I can speak to it from a place of humility as somebody who has done clinical work. And a lot of times, I think in the face of those kinds of very serious circumstances, there's a tendency to want to step in and keep people safe, and to sometimes step in prematurely and rob them of some choice and autonomy. And there are a variety of different ways that you can step in. And it really makes me think about having those advanced conversations with people, creating a really robust wrap plan that Amy and Jesse are really familiar with. Like, what else can we do differently when things are starting to be out of control to make sure that I'm honoring your autonomy, but also that you're safe and we're going to get through this together, because that allows people to, whether it's an advanced directive or an advanced crisis plan of wrap, it allows people to hang on to as much dignity and autonomy as possible at a time of crisis. So I've had to learn myself a lot about those tools over the years and have found them really useful in my practice.
Yeah, we use a lot of clinical judgment. Only our licensed therapists can make those calls for our clients, but my judgment is obviously well taken here.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. But I think we have one more. Carol, did you have your hand up? Or Jesse, did you want to take it back off of that?
Real quick, for anyone in Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, or New Mexico, I do provide support through SAMHSA funding, and I put my email in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have questions along those lines. That is literally my job.
The question that was in the chat earlier, and I don't think you're going to have time to get to it, so it might be something you can type up and we can send out with the PowerPoint, is that there was some discussion about peer supports also being the case managers. And I think the last person talked about that a little bit, but was more about the reporting than about the dual role.
Yeah, thank you.
That was really more about the dual role, but yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. I'm sure we'd be happy to take a look at the question and maybe put a little something together with you all. Well, I'm pretty sure I know Jesse and Amy well enough to know that we're very passionate about this topic. We don't just like to teach, we like to learn from people and hear from you. So please stay in touch. All of our contact information is on the slide here. And big thank you to the Office of Recovery Affairs for inviting us to do this. And Amy, Jesse, any parting words?
I cannot type and talk. The thing that I want to say is thank you all for taking this time to show up, to do the work that you're doing, and to really be in that place of exploration of what it might look like to involve peer specialists in this person-centered recovery planning process. And just in any way that you're utilizing peer specialists in the role, or you yourself are a peer specialist, like, you make a difference. So thank you for being here.
I would also echo, thank you for being here. Do have to apologize for speaking so fast as I was watching the clock, but I am so excited you all were here, and please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you all. We appreciate it. Have a good afternoon, everybody.